Welcome to the studio. I am delighted to say I am joined by Arti Garg, the Chief Technologist at AVEVA. Arti, welcome to the studio. Welcome to London Tech Week. How are you finding it? Is this your first time at London Tech Week?
This is my first time at London Tech Week. Thank you for having me at the studio. And it's been, there's a lot of energy and excitement around here. So it's a great experience to be here.
Brilliant. But you were just on stage and your session was about driving innovation towards a greener future, a pretty bold title. What would you say is the honest answer? Is AI actually accelerating the green transition, or are we still really making the case for it?
I think that AI has an important role in accelerating the green transition. I don't know that we're making a case for AI to be part of a more environmentally sustainable future. I think where we're still making the case is, what does it look like? So a couple of things that I spoke about on the panel were, one, thinking about AI, not just sort of the direct impacts of AI, but some of the ways that AI becomes an enabling technology to other things that are part of a more sustainable future. One of the things my team is working on, which is thinking about how you can use AI reliably within grid operations. And the reason that's so important is because not specifically for the grid operations themselves and reducing their impact, but because as we transition to more renewables, it means the grid needs to handle more intermittent production, energy production, and also more distributed energy production. There's a lot more complexity on the grid. And so then it's not the direct measurement of AI's impact, it's what it enables. I also gave an example of how you can leverage AI to maybe create more, to simulate the production of more sustainable chemicals and so new materials and new capabilities. And so I think, that's one part of the conversation that sometimes gets missed. I think the other part of the conversation, though, is the reason this is so hard is that we don't really know how to measure the environmental impact of AI, or at least we don't have an agreed upon way to measure it. And, that really creates a problem for being able to say this is the net benefit or this is the net impact of leveraging AI. So I chair the IEEE's Environmental Impacts of AI Standards Working Group. We're a standards body trying to develop a standard way of doing that, and then also across multiple metrics, carbon, electricity, water consumption, and then also, making sure it's reflective of what can be measured and creating stakeholder buy-in to measure it.
I mean, that is a really good point, measuring it. I suppose the other issue that seems paradoxical when you're talking about this is that you're addressing the fact that, we need climate solutions, but yet AI itself consumes enormous energy. So that feels like a strange paradox, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think this is, kind of an ongoing question. And you'll hear multiple sides to this equation, because you'll hear on the one hand that, okay, but the net impact of AI to the overall world's electricity consumption is still small relative to other things. And with the IEA report that came out last year, one of the, it's small, say, compared to vehicle electrification, which nobody questions the value of vehicle electrification as an example. And I think, though, some of this comes down to there's all those unknowns. One, exactly how much impact is AI having in energy consumption? I think there's also what is the ROI on it? So with vehicle electrification, it's very clear what it's replacing. On the panel that I was just on, the topic that came up was leveraging AI in the energy system is probably a no-brainer, but is that the majority of how people use AI? Or are there other ways, are the things that the majority of usage of AI might be a net negative, whether that's disinformation or whether that's things that cause people to decide to consume more? So it's, but that being said, I'm not an AI naysayer by any stretch of the imagination. I just think that, we just need to kind of think of the balance in a more nuanced way.
Just earlier this afternoon, I was speaking to the CEO of D-Wave Quantum, and he was telling me about, quantum and how it uses much less energy comparative to AI. Do you have any applications of quantum at AVEVA?
Yeah, so, we've certainly been looking at quantum computing technology and what its potential is, particularly in the industrial sector. It's still a new technology.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say it's not a mainstream computing technology. There's a number of critical problems that need to be solved in order to sort of really scale it, and then also to be able to solve where it can be quantum computing specifically, where it can be applied to different problems. I think there is some potential for quantum computing to enable either larger or sort of, at least, per calculation, more efficient computing, particularly in traditional simulation workloads. And I think that's important because I think simulation is actually very critical to many things that we might want to do to drive new materials, new capabilities, better and more sustainable operations. We don't always think about that, but I think that's critical. My background is in advanced computing, so I think it's very exciting to think about it, but I don't think I would ever say that they're interchangeable technologies. I think quantum computing is better suited to different types of problems.
Let's talk a little bit about data. You've talked about getting data AI ready as one of the core challenges in industrial and infrastructure settings. And how much of the green innovation agenda would you say is blocked by that? Companies who want to optimize, but frankly, they can't because their data is just a mess. And, the data gets very complicated in this.
Yeah. Well, so that is a challenge in the industrial sector writ large, is not just having the data, but also having the data in context.
Yeah.
And so, being able to really say these data came from this sensor at this time and compare them across, both as operated, but then maybe even tie it back to how systems were designed, and being able to, again, go back to the simulation peak, being able to leverage how, our understanding of how things interoperate to simulate and, pressure test better ways of doing things. That's one of the things at AVEVA that we think about a lot, and, one of our core offerings is the industrial digital twin, which allows for industrial data in context, and then also across the life cycle. So it's not, sometimes you talk about both the digital twin and the digital thread across as designed and as built, because sometimes the hierarchy might be different in those cases. In terms of how does this block some of the leveraging AI to do things more sustainably, we all know that AI is, in some ways, it even generative AI in some ways is predictive, in the sense it's based on the data it's consumed, what should be the next token, what should be the next bit of text or whatever. The lack of sort of a large, standardized, kind of large industrial data sets to train novel models means that there's some limitations on how you can create sort of general purpose AI, which means instead you might go back to having more kind of fit for purpose, which is one thing, but also trained to a specific use case, which can take longer to find the right model. And so, and then there's all the places where there just aren't data, because they're not collected, but there are not sensors. Then the whole
picture is very inaccurate. So it's a huge challenge, isn't it? You've worked in White House policy, I believe, and across the industrial sector. I'd like to get your opinion on the fact that, governments are setting their targets, but industry has to deliver them. And where do you see the biggest gap between those two conversations right now?
Typically, and I'm sort of speaking for myself, somewhat here, is that, typically, my experience has always been these things happen in conversation. So I'll go back specifically to the work that, I've been doing around standards development. I always say standards are not useful if, one, you can't apply them, and two, nobody uses it, right? They don't.
There's in isolation.
Yeah, there's no consequence to not reporting on them, right? And so, I think that we have thought from the beginning, have spoken to policymakers in a number of different regions about what we're doing, to start to have those conversations around what would be sensible from a regulatory standpoint in AI. So I think, probably the biggest challenge with AI specifically is just how fast and how quickly things are evolving. And so even like what should be the right figure of merit, what should be the thing you regulate, like...
Well, that will have changed in 6 months.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
and so I think that's the core challenge.
And just finally, Arti, are you broadly optimistic? Are you more glass half full than glass half empty about the impact of AI going forward? How do you feel?
I think that there's a lot of opportunity. Like any technology, I think there's a lot of good things that people can and will do with AI. People will use AI in ways that we don't like, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And so I guess what I would say is that I think AI is like any other technology. It can be, hugely transformative. It is already hugely transformative, and I think we'll do a lot of great things with it. I like to think about how can we leverage AI responsibly, and that's one of our core principles at AVEVA. How do we leverage AI responsibly within our company, in our products, help our customers do the same. I'm optimistic about the good things that we can do with AI, and I also think new technologies always have
their downsides.
Their downsides as well, and that doesn't stop us from driving cars, and it doesn't stop us from doing a lot of other things because there's benefits too. I flew here on an airplane.
You may not be driving cars in streets very soon, right?
Exactly.
Well, you're probably not in the Bay Area anyway, so yeah.
Yes, indeed.
All right, Arti, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us here in the studio.
Thank you so much for having me here.